Chapter 14. Rejoicing in Salt Creek that night was genuine, but it was not overdone. While a powerful and corrupt political machine had been brought to book, it was not yet thrown out of office, nor was its menace destroyed. Until the 3 or 4 days had passed which would bring it to an end, Dan Shane's iron rule would be more dangerous than ever. The following morning, Rayburn met Bronson Colcord and Loren on the street. It was the first he had seen of father or daughter since the results of the election had become known, and Colcord's bony face lit up. "Congratulations, Sheriff!" he exclaimed, and went on. "I know you feel with me that justice has triumphed. There will be no questions of its completeness. We are on our way now for a word with Judge Landis and the others." Rayburn smiled at his zeal. His glance went to Loren's face. She was prettier than ever this morning, he thought. The sun warmed her honey-colored hair, and her gray eyes were serene. The sobriety lay across her smooth cheeks, however, said that she had thought for some other things than a mere surface pleasure. "Well, now that you've been elected to sheriff," she said, "I hope you don't feel that Salt Creek needs any more taming as Ringgold." Light as her tone was, he could not mistake the seriousness in her words. "I'll let Salt Creek answer that question," he smiled. There were a few minutes more of talk, and then Reverend Colcord said as he started away, "I'm holding a service of Thanksgiving at the church this evening, Rayburn. I expect you'll be there." Rayburn lifted his hat as Loren and her father left him. A smile of assent curled his long lips, but when he put on again, he remained where he was standing, looking after them thoughtfully. It was on Colcord that his glance lingered. "It's mighty plain that he thinks the outcome of this election was an act of God," he mused. Colcord might be right at that, but Rayburn chose to take another view of the situation. He was not fooled in the slightest by the heavy calm which had held this town since the previous evening. If Dan Shane and his crowd were holding off, it was solely for a practical consideration, and one which boded no good for unsuspected townsfolk. Not that they were entirely unsuspecting, as Reverend K. Colcord. They were at least ready for trouble. Salt Creek was still an armed camp, with both sides on the peck, to walk down Main Street to run the gauntlet of weary eyes. Cuff Morrison had given up the idea of snagging Dutcher deep in the hills, patrolling town with pompous dignity. He could be hard on punchers, having a file in on the bar, but studiously averting his gaze from Ballard, Chatter, and some of the others who appeared only too ready to cross swords with him. Later in the day, Rayburn stopped in to see Landis. The judge-elect greeted him with a smile, and then sobered at the look on his face. "What's the trouble, Clark?" "I don't like the feel of things," Rayburn admitted, lines furrowing his brow. "All this is too damned peaceable. It can't last. If there was a flare-up or two in the saloons, I'd feel different about it, but—" "I know," Landis nodded. "Shane sticks to his store, but he isn't licked. The boys understand," he went on. "Until the balance of power changes hands here, they won't be very far away. If anything breaks, we can only hope to be able to deal with it." Silence stretched out between these two, neither of whom were accustomed to talk much in times of stress. Rayburn deliberately rolled a smoke, and demolished it with 3 long drags before he said quietly, "Reverend Colcord's holding a meeting tonight. That might prove to be a mistake." Landis shook his head. "I don't think so, Clark. Dan Shane's a hard man, but he's not a foolish one. What happens here since the last time his thugs took liberty with the house of God certainly should convince him of its folly." "Just in case he proves hard to convince," Rayburn broke in, "I'm going to be posting a watch tonight." Colkert appeared to have publicized his meeting with unusual thoroughness, for as evening drew on, rigs and ranch wagons appeared from every point of the compass, and the people who crowded into the little church literally jammed it to the doors. This was a devout country, this range where life had been more than hard for a long time. Rayburn would have thought twice before destroying Reverend Colkert's deep pleasure in this evidence of godliness with the suggestion that these people had been drawn in by the hope that their minister would proclaim triumphantly from the pulpit the things they had read so often in the Salt Creek Wasp, with the appropriate morals duly pointed up. That Colkert, whether by design or not, was one a step ahead of them, was proved by his impassionate theme of brotherly love. Rayburn chuckled when it was over. It left no one with anything to say, not even himself. He was relieved when the last rig rolled out of town on the home trail and no disturbance occurred. Evidently Dan Shane had laid a deeper scheme for the divisive blow Rayburn had no doubt would come. The following day was a replica of the last, with no more than tense nerves to pay the price of waiting. On Friday, the newly elected officers were installed in office. Rayburn looked over his little office in the rear of the courthouse, contempt stirring him at the litter that Cuff Morrison had left behind, but he spent no time there. His first official act was to visit the bars and search for his friends. "Gather the boys," he told them curtly. "Tell them I want to see them. There's a job waiting." Their expression of curiosity, however, he refused to satisfy. Within an hour he swore in between 30 and 40 men whom he could trust as deputies, and then, satisfied that he had had enough, he faced them around with a raised hand. "Boys," he began, having got their attention, "we're cleaning up Salt Creek, and I want a good, swift job without gunplay if it can be helped. Don't make the mistake of overstepping yourselves, but stand on your rights. We're not giving the pitchfork 12 hours to leave town. These men, they're leaving now." That the posse men were ready to act was plain to read on their face. "You just say the word, Clark," Gift Naylor exclaimed. "Where do we start?" Rayburn broke them into groups of 3 or 4, and they were to comb the town quietly, gathering up Shane's men without violence wherever possible, but quickly in any event. These men were to be escorted to the edge of town, and then warned away. "And see that they go," Rayburn concluded tensely. "That's all." It was revealed in the flashing eyes of the deputies as they made for the street that they hoped their enemies would refuse. Something about their grim manner said they would know what to do. That Salt Creek divined what was going forward before 10 minutes had passed was demonstrated by the rapidity of which Main Street emptied. Before the deputies finished dividing up, it was deserted. These men moved down the plank sidewalks nonchalantly, dropping away by 2s and 3s as they stepped into this or that store or saloon. They soon reappeared, escorting some pitchfork puncher who argued briefly and then abruptly dried up. The Pitchfork Ranch lay to the north. That way Shane's black legs were led, their bridle reins thrust into their hands. One man, who elected to protest, had his gun shot out of his fist, and the rest prudently mounted and then started away, spouting fire and wrath, but leaving no doubt of the fact that now, at least, they intended doing as they were ordered. With Gift Naylor and Jim Worth at his shoulders, Rayburn made for the Pecos house. Their spurs jingled as they went up the steps of the veranda. There was seldom a time when half a dozen men were not gathered here in talk, but now the porch was empty. "In here," Rayburn grunted, making for the bar. Cuff Morrison whirled, spilling his drink in a betrayed jerk of his hand as they entered. The ex-sheriff's belligerent face was pasty, his eyes stared. He had been cocked for this moment. The tense silence of these other men said that he had made his brag as to how he would meet it. But now Morrison froze, staring at Rayburn in an agony of indecision. Sweat beaded his brow, and suddenly the glass in his fingers broke, and fragments jingled and clattered to the floor. Rayburn said quietly, "Come here, Morrison." Blood flamed into Cuff's visage. "By God, I won't!" he cried violently, and then, "What are you aiming to do with me, Rayburn?" Clearly, he anticipated foul play, the fear of it crawling into him, making him craven. Rayburn answered, "I'm putting you on a horse and heading you north, Cuff, if that'll relieve your mind. The same goes for you, Mathers," he added, seeing a pitchfork hand attempting to sidle towards the rear door. "What the hell, Sheriff?" Mather protested. "I ain't done a thing." "That's right," Rayburn agreed gravely. "And you ain't going to. Go get 'em, boys." It looked as if Mathers, a blocky, flat-faced individual with shifty eyes, was going to put up a fight. But he allowed himself to be disarmed and let out, muttering. Rayburn repeated, "Come on, Cuff." By God, you'll regret this, Rayburn," Morrison sputtered furiously. Rayburn's nod was good-humored. "Just be sure you don't, Cuff," he advised. Morrison was herded to the upper end of Main Street and started off with the others. Black of face, he jogged away, hurling defiance over his shoulder, and Gift Naylor laughed. "That Cuff, he sure talks a mighty big fight," he commented. To Rayburn's disappointed, Poke Flasher was nowhere to be found. "You sure he ain't in town?" he inquired sharply when one after another of his deputies reported the fact. "I don't intend to let that wolf tear loose when we think we're squared around. We better take us another look around." But it was all to no purpose. Rayburn's conclusion was that, anticipating this move, and rather than show a cheap defiance when it would do no good, Flasher had retired to the pitchfork spread. Dan Shane, he knew, had done the same. Once election had been decided, trade had fallen off sharply at Shane and Purcell's store, and there was no profit in handing out cut plug to the company's own men. Shane had locked the doors and ridden away, but with an air which said that he would be back in his own good time. By mid-afternoon, the last of the pitchfork crowd had been shunted out of town. A new freedom was at once felt here, as Gift Naylor remarked. Even the air seemed sweeter. Rayburn was not done yet, however. Men watched with a new respect as he headed for the courthouse, for with the octopus of this range quietly uprooted and disposed of without the death of a single man to mar the occasion, his qualities had been demonstrated in a way that not even the most disinterested observer could fail to appreciate. Rayburn sought Judge Landis and came to the point at once. "I want to swear out warrants for the arrest of 7 men, he said. Landis raised his eyebrows, his surprise evident. "And who are they, Sheriff?" "I'm going after the rest of the men who killed Kim," was the answer. Rayburn named them. They were all that were left alive of the original posse which had gone to the Rail S, some having killed in the fighting at Spanish Ford. "I'd do the same thing in your boots," Landis nodded. "Do you know where to find these men?" "I'll worry about that if I can't find them at the pitchfork." Landis gave him a slow look at that, but said no more. The warrants were soon sworn out. Rayburn thrust them into his shirt, went to look for Naylor and Jim Worth. He had appointed them as his permanent deputies. Once found, they were quickly made acquainted with what he was proposing to do. "When you starting after those birds, clerk?" Gift inquired. "Right away will be soon enough for me." Naylor's lips parted at a grin. Well, me and Jim will get us saddled up, if you can wait that long. They got away from town as the sun sank in a blazing sky. The pitchfork could not be reached before midnight, but Rayburn was in no mood to pick the hour of his arrival. When he got there, he told himself he would yank the wanted men out of bunkhouses and hustle them to town. As it turned out, however, the full trip to Shane's ranch was not necessary. A dozen miles from Salt Creek, in a canyon through which the trail passed, stood a building known as Blocker's Grocery. While it was true that a few staple items of food could be procured here, the place was in reality a saloon and a gambling house. There were always a number of punchers from one outfit or another hanging about, although late it had been given over largely to pitchfork crowd. Gus Blocker made no complaint, so long as trade was steady. Rayburn and his deputies arrived there just as the moon was rising. The trail through the canyon, however, lay in shadow, a dark, mysterious place, hemmed in by crags with only the remote stars overhead. The howl of a coyote, miles away in the deep hills, seemed only to accentuate the silence. You stopping in at Blocker's? Naylor grunted. Rayburn's answer was explicit enough. Well, I'm not passing it up. Lights blazed through the cracked windows of the place as they approached, and from a little distance the easy sound of laughter and men's talk had come to them. But this suddenly hushed. Rayburn knew that already somebody had spotted the approaching horses and passed the word. Time was when Blocker had been a range hotel. Store and bar had been set up in the original office. The front windows had been barred up for some reason best known to the proprietor, but the door stood wide open. In silence, the three dismounted before the steps, and together they went in. Rayburn needed no warning that what he was doing now was vastly different from what he had done in town. Here he was on enemy territory, where anything might happen, where the badge he wore on his vest would carry no meaning whatever but that which he was ready to back up with the pressure of cold will. He told himself all this unmoved. When his eye ran over the dozen motionless men in the room, he knew he was right. Every man here save Blocker himself was pitchfork hand. 4 out of the 7 for whom he was carrying warrants were ranged over at the bar, where they had been drinking and talking, and a 5th sat in a corner, his chair tilted against the wall. The quiet stretched out, while Blocker, a stunned, evil-visaged individual, glared from behind the bar. "What are you after, Rayburn?" he demanded at length. "I want Curly, Ace, Dick Hill, and Jeff there, Andy Mason." Rayburn laid his composed voice over the jarred tension of this room. "The rest of you boys," he waved a hand, "you can just forget that I was here." The men named straightened stiffly with strained face. But the surprise of this visit had been complete. Nobody had expected the new sheriff to take hold so quickly and so decisive. Wary eyes explored the ready guns in Naylor and Jim Worth's fists, and whatever defiance there were in the man's abruptly folded. Rayburn saw his prisoners led outside, shoved on their horses, and still he hesitated. "Charlie Bowers and his brother Ike," he told Blocker. "It's strange they're not here." "Well, they ain't." The hunchback's venomous tone decided Rayburn. He said to Giff, "Comb this place over. I got a hunch the men we want are here too." Blocker would have protested, but Rayburn brought him up short. Naylor proceeded to an efficient examination of the building. He came downstairs 10 minutes later, herding the Bauer brothers at gunpoint. "They're sleeping up there in the loft." Rayburn nodded his satisfaction, and 5 minutes later saw the lawmen and captives on the way back to town, but not until Black Canyon was put behind him did Rayburn breathe a little more easily. By that time he realized that the pitchfork must be paralyzed by all that had happened within the past week. Not otherwise could he have hoped for so easy a conquest. Before dawn had broken, the ex-possummen charged with the complicity in the murder of Kim Rayburn were gotten to Salt Creek and put up in jail. Rayburn was sitting in his office that afternoon when a step at the door made him raise his head. Loren stood there. He found his feet in an instant and welcomed her. Their talk was of small matters for some moments, but the girl knew he was waiting, wondering what had brought her here in this fashion. Gathering her forces, she gave him a clear look. "Clark, I can't tell you how much we all appreciate what you've done since your return to Salt Creek. But for you, our hopes might have fallen through utterly. You have been magnificent through it all." Rayburn flushed with embarrassment. "I only done what I needed to do, Loren. There's no need for special thanks." Intent on a distracting tinsel of honey-colored hair at her throat, he was not aware that he had used her given name, but she noted it, and a touch of color visited her cheek. She was about to answer when an interruption occurred. A heavy voice at the door said, but not in a tone of apology, "Excuse me." It was Dan Shane. Rayburn's glance shot to him and held there, his body suddenly stiff and ready. But Shane only went on staring for a moment, and then, without any notice of Loren, he spoke to Rayburn bitterly and forcibly. "You won, Rayburn. You're handing out the law here, and I heard about that little business at Blocker's. Just in case you run out of something to do." He could not forbear the sneer. "I've a warrant sworn out for Dutcher, the man who robbed our bank." Rayburn's lips thinned as he picked up the warrant from the desk where Shane had tossed it. It was an order, and he nodded curtly. "All right, Shane. I'll go after him. I'm taking your orders now, but watch your step. If sending me after Dutcher is your answer to my arresting those men last night, I've got this to say. To my mind, you murdered my brother Kim as surely as Tex Bunker himself. I'll get Fay Dutcher, Shane, but before I'm finished, I'll be getting you." Shane glared, his harsh breathing audible. About to retort fiercely, he checked himself, and the next moment he whirled on his heel, and then walked out. End of chapter 14.